Jessica Thebus is a theater artist, director, educator, wife, daughter, and mother. Today she's sharing an old story about what we feel and what we do change each other.
This is the story of the princess and the mask. And some people say this story happened in China, and some people say this story happened in Russia, and some people say this story happened in places far away that aren't even remembered. But everyone says that somewhere, sometime, this story happened. And I'm going to tell it to you today. So it begins, of course, with a princess. And she was beautiful and wise and generous. And she loved her life. She learned, she taught, she gave, and she helped the whole city in her father's kingdom thrive. But of course, because he was king and he was getting older, at one point he said, "My dear, you do have to get married. There must be a king to follow me." Now, the princess argued that there really didn't need to be a king to follow him, that there could be a queen and she could rule in his stead. But at that time, no one would go along with it. And finally, out of respect for her father, she agreed she would get married. But she laid down a condition. She said, "I will only marry the man with the most beautiful face in the world." And her father was a bit surprised and said to her, "My dear, I never thought physical beauty was that important to you. I would think it would be wisdom or generosity or some, more virtuous trait." And she said, "Oh, no, not physically beautiful. But I want to marry the man. If I am going to make him king, I want to be able to see compassion in his eyes, wisdom on his brow, tenderness in his cheeks, and strength in his jaw. He must have the face of the most beautiful soul that I've ever seen." Now, her father felt he was lucky to get her to agree at all, and so he accepted this condition. And of course, since she was a princess and her father was extremely wealthy and was a powerful king, she had many suitors, handsome knights, powerful businessmen, princes of neighboring kingdoms. They all showed up, and the princess was generous and hospitable to all of them, invited them in, had tea with them. But each one, as soon as she looked at his face, she knew. There might be one who had some wisdom on his brow, but his mouth was cruel. There might be one with tenderness in his face, but his eyes showed that he had no experience of the world. There might be one with strength in his jaw, but on his brow sat some selfishness. And she said each time to her increasingly frustrated father, "He does not have the most beautiful face in the world." And this went on for years. And it became a story. Well, there's the line of suitors waiting to go into the palace. And the princess was also frustrated because whereas before she'd played music in the morning and read books in the afternoon and visited the children in the poor sections of town in the evening and baked and gave away the sweets that she baked, she had done a lot of exciting things. And now every day she sat looking at the face of a different suitor and drinking tea. But she couldn't get out of it, neither could her father, and so it continued. Now, at this very same time, there was a thief. And I would say he was a famous thief, except he was such a good thief that no one even really knew his name. So he was not famous, But he was rich, he was clever, and he had managed to steal things out of people's pockets and out of people's bank accounts and out of people's houses. Things he stole so quietly, they didn't realize they were gone till a year later. And he prided himself on being the city's most clever thief. And as this was unrolling for years, with the suitors lining up going in to see the princess, he would think, oh, if there was only a way, that I could be one of those suitors. I mean, think of the riches that are in the palace. Get to be king. It would be the greatest theft of all time. But then he would look in the mirror and he would see his face, and he would see the greed, the corruption, the cruelty plastered all over his face and every line of his brow. And he thought, nah, there's no way. And then one night he was dreaming of the gold, the crowns, the diamonds, the power, and he sat up in bed and he thought, oh, that's it. The artist. I must go see the artist. And without even washing his face, he put on heavy clothes and he took a bag of gold from his last heist and he packed a bag with some bread and he set out. He set out to see the artist. Now, the artist was the greatest artist of that or any time. People said of the artist that when he painted birds, they were so lifelike, they flew from the canvas and left it empty. But the artist had disappeared years before, and the rumor was that he lived as a hermit in the high snowy mountains. But the thief was so convinced that his vision could become a reality that he set out and he climbed those snowy mountains and he asked people on the road where the artist might be, and there were rumors, and he climbed higher and higher and higher until after 3 days of climbing in the mountains outside the city, of wrapping himself in that cold wind, he saw a little hut up ahead. And as he got closer to it, he saw that all of the stumps had been carved into birds. And he saw the beautiful trees that he thought were real trees, but then he realized were sculptures all around this little house. And he thought, aha, this is where the artist is. He knocked on the door, and for a long time the artist didn't answer, but finally he did. And by that time the artist was an old man, and he said, I'm not interested. But the thief, with his silver tongue, convinced the artist to let him in. And he told him his proposition. For this sack of gold, I will give you only as a promise for more gold to come and more diamonds to come if you will make me a mask. A mask that fits so perfectly onto my own face that it looks like it's my own skin. And it has to be the most beautiful face in the world, with wisdom on the brow, compassion in the eyes, every virtue in the lines of the cheeks, strength in the jaw, tenderness and generosity in the line of the lips. And the artist didn't care so much about the gold, but he did become interested in the challenge of it. And he said, all right, sit in that chair. I will work. And day after day, the artist carved wood and blew away the sawdust and tried the mask on the face of the thief. And finally, it fit. And when the thief looked in the mirror, he couldn't believe it. It looked exactly like his face, and it was beautiful. He left the gold with the artist, and he hurried down through those snowy hills, and he dressed as quickly as he could in the finest robes that his thievery had allowed him, and he went and stood in that line of suitors. And after a few days of standing in line, he was welcomed into the palace, and each person who saw him took a second look at his face, and finally he was welcomed into the presence of the princess. And she greeted him and offered him tea, and then she looked up at his face, and she saw the most beautiful face in the world. And the thief, of course, was very clever. And they had a conversation where he behaved as though he were that virtuous man with all that wisdom and all of that strength and all of that experience of the pains of the world and the virtue with which he'd met them. And after a very short time, no more than 45 minutes, the princess went to her shocked father and said, "I found him. I found the man with the most beautiful face in the world." Her father was extremely relieved and went and shook the hand of the thief and heard the thief's tall tale that he was a prince of a neighboring kingdom so far away that it had taken him years to journey all that way. And the father wanted to believe it, so he believed it. And the wedding was planned. And the thief was ecstatic. He couldn't believe it. His plan had worked. And as soon as the wedding happened, it would all be his. Now, what the thief didn't realize was that the wedding would be a year away. A year, he said. Why is it so far away? Well, the princess was a princess. And there had to be relatives, and all of the neighboring kings had to be invited. Everyone had to come, and it would take them a year to build the pavilions for everyone to travel. "But don't worry," said the king, "you will have the royal apartments in the palace. You can spend the year getting to know your bride, learning how to be a good king. It'll go faster than you can imagine." And so the thief settled down for a year. And the hardest part was he had to keep up this fiction. Every time he spoke, he had to speak like he was the virtuous man with the most beautiful face in the world. He had to think, well, what would someone incredibly generous do? And he had no experience being that person. What would someone with strength of character do? What would someone with patience say? And every day he got a little bit better at it. And he and the princess took walks in the garden. And they rowed in the boat on the lake. And they baked for the poor children in the city, and they delivered the baked goods to them. They painted. They built walls to keep the warmth in at night for the people who were fragile and elderly. They sang together. And as the months passed, he really began to enjoy his time with the princess. He found her so funny and so wise, so engaging, that one day he thought, even if she wasn't a princess, I could see someone definitely being in love with her. And the next day he thought, even if she wasn't a princess, I could see myself really enjoying spending time with her. On the third day he thought, even if she wasn't a princess, I could see myself falling deeply in love with her. And finally, it was the last week before the wedding, and the thief's heart was in torment. He thought, I can't break her heart. I can't believe it, but I can't go through with it. I cannot watch her eyes that I now love feel so betrayed. I cannot ruin her life in this way by stealing it, by stealing the kingdom after everything I have accomplished. I just can't do it. And on their last walk in the garden, alone together before the wedding preparations, he finally put his hand on her arm and he said, I have something to say to you. And she turned to him and said, yes, my love, what is it? And he said, I am not who you think I am. And he told her that he was wearing the mask and it hid the face of a thief. He saw the heartbreak in her eyes, and it almost melted him. And he shook his head and could only say, "I am sorry." And she prepared to call the palace guards and only hesitated for a moment and then called them. "Guards!" They came running. She said, "Take this man away. I can't look at him again." And the guards seized him by the arms. And the thief looked at her, knowing this was the last time he would look at that beloved face. But just before they dragged him out of the garden, she said, "Wait." And then she said, "Show me your real face. At least let me look at the face of the man who has broken my heart." He was filled with shame, but he removed the mask and faced her. And he saw in her eyes first shock, and then wonder. And then she said, "But why would you have gone to so much trouble to have a mask carved that looked exactly like your own face?" He put his hands to his face, and then he looked into the water in the pond in the garden. And indeed, because for a year he had been patient, his face had become patient. And for a year he had been wise, his face had become wise. And for a year he had been compassionate, his eyes had become compassionate. He had the most beautiful face in the world. As love had changed his heart, his actions had changed his face. The thief and the princess were married the next day. And it is said that they ruled together, wisely and well, for a long, long time. And that is the story of the princess and the man.